As Nicky mentioned, I'm a member of the SSP, Scottish Socialist Party, and I've been a socialist for 6 or 7 years now. I might look a bit older, but I'm 23, so if you do the maths, I was about 16 when I started getting into it. And it was actually the invasion of Iraq which caused me to become active in politics and to start to campaign against the policies of imperialism. But foremost in my mind, prior to that, had been me as a young person trying to understand what was going on in the world and why a government would invade Afghanistan and why the Afghan people were in such a bad position even prior to the invasion. So since the invasion, I've taken a keen interest in the place and in my work in the SSP and live in various different places. I've had the pleasure of meeting several people who have come over as refugees from Afghanistan. And there's one thing that marks them all out is that despite the image that our media often paints that it's some sort of dark land where backwards ideas reign, I've actually found the opposite. The Afghan people are very intelligent, insightful, and have a much better understanding of the real world and the motivations for governments doing things than many people in this country. Afghanistan of course, as we're being reminded just now, as a graveyard, has been a graveyard many times for empires. Over thousands of years, and several countries have tried to occupy the place, colonise it, and each time, eventually, they've been driven out. It's also despite some of the images that we get, it's also a very diverse place. Ethnically, there's Pashtuns, Uzbeks, Tajiks, and many other people who live there. And normally, historically, relatively in peace, despite the current policy that the British and American governments are pursuing secretly, which is to try and inflame tensions between different communities. The backwardness that they try and paint and the backwardness that doesn't really exist, but they're going to try and cause, stems from the economic backwardness of Afghanistan, which comes from the fact that it's never been able to have a period of proper stability. It's constantly had people interfering in its affairs and its destiny, and that's where all the major problems in Afghanistan come from, and they've only been made worse by the occupation, despite what was claimed. The position of women is one that's often used, that our government used, and Laura Bush, George Bush's wife, famously talked about to try and make it seem like the occupation was okay. That's not something that is inherent in Afghan culture. Neither is it something that comes because of the fact that the population is mostly Muslim. That's not true. For example, in the 70s, recently the 70s, there was a progressive government in place, and until the Soviet invasion, there was a thriving civil society where people were able to form organisations and speak out on matters such as women's liberation and so on. Also, still is the fact today that I'm yet to meet an Afghan who says, the thing I like about the Taliban is that they don't like women and they don't think women should go to school. That's not why people support or have any affection for the Taliban. Anybody who has anybody who says anything other than blanket criticism of the Taliban, it's the fact that they're willing to stand up against occupiers. But the majority of people don't stand for. I don't believe, and polls don't suggest. The majority of Afghans don't support a backwards program where people have to live in fear, or women are held back. The unfortunate thing for Afghanistan is, and the reason why it's had so much trouble over the years, it's unlucky enough to to be situated in a place in the world that many empires think is very important. There's India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers in the east, Iran, America's greatest enemy lately, to the west, and there's also China to the east and north, and it's not too far from the Middle East either. So it's a place that many empires have been keen to keep in their sphere of power, And that, I believe, is the real reason for the American invasion, not to protect people's rights and not for anything else. It's to keep for them, what for them is a strategically important place inside their sphere of power, and they'll do anything to make sure it's still in that sphere of power and that the free market is able to get access there. Now the invasion, obviously there was the issue of women's rights, but it was the major trigger was, of course, the September the 11th attacks. Does anyone know how many Afghans were involved in the September 11th attacks? Does anyone know the number?
Zero.
Zero, absolutely none. The September 11th attacks were carried out by a mixture of Egyptians, Saudis, Emiratis, and I think one or two Lebanese as well. No Afghans whatsoever, no involvement from the Afghan government either, and yet that was used as the reason for the invasion. Despite the fact that that government, of course, the regime of the Taliban and the previous Mujahideen fighters had once upon a time, not even that long ago actually, in recent memory, been active allies of the United States, had received funding from them, and of course, famously now, Osama Bin Laden himself received millions of dollars in aid from the CIA so he could buy weapons to fight the Soviets. So a similar situation to Iraq with Saddam Hussein, who became, according to our press, a fascist dictator and one of history's great monsters, but who had previously, of course, been a friend to Britain and America. And so when they went into Afghanistan, they gave them made a lot of false promises that they bring democracy. The people were apparently crying out for it. It would bring development, economic development, and it would bring greater human rights, civil rights for the population. And all three of those counts, democracy, economic development, and their freedom and their rights, it's gone backwards rather than forwards. And instead of the Taliban, who, for all their evils, and I don't personally support them, but for all their wrongs, at least had some sort of ideology and cause that they believed they were fighting for. The people who have been put in place now are simply corrupt puppets of America. They're just there for power, and they're there for money, and they're there to help their friends, a small circle of friends, and no one else. And so that's why the situation in the country's gone backwards in that time.